if you haven't, don't forget to send me an email via D2L. See, we get out of here at 11. No later than, I'll say 3 o'clock this afternoon. I've got to send in the attendance reporting, which if I report that you've not attended because I don't get that email, that gives me a kind of like a physical copy. The folks in financial aid might come breathing down your neck. In other words, they might not release the rest of your financial aid. So make sure you send me that email. There's an email to you, just respond to it. You don't have to say anything, just respond to it, okay? That counts for being physically, actively engaged in the class, according to MTSU. Okay, or check your D2L email and see the message there and just reply to it. Some of you already have, but not all of you. So, Nathaniel Hawthorne's Minister's Black Veil. You got an introduction to Hawthorne, a couple of pages. Read over that. Material from that could show up on the quiz. What we're going to attempt to do today is do all of the Minister's Black Veil and maybe get started into Faulkner's barn burning, but I doubt we'll get into barn burning. Okay, Minister's Black Veil. Got a date of 1836, that's when he wrote it. And then notice it has a subtitle. And the subtitle says that it is a parable. Okay? What's a parable?
An earthly story with a heavenly meaning.
Ooh. Always? All the time?
That's just a definition, actually.
Who famously told parables? Did Buddha tell parables? Did Muhammad tell parables? Jesus told parables. Most of what Jesus says is parables. You know, he actually delivers relatively few, quote unquote, sermons. Sermon on the Mount is the most famous one. So what's meant by a parable? Is a parable, another definition that's often used or often given, is a parable is a story that is meant to convey a message. And yet, if you go back, for example, to Christ, to the Gospels, and you look at all the instances where he tells a parable, in the majority of those instances, nobody has a clue what he's talking about. They don't get the message, in other words. They hear the story, but they don't know what he means. He, in several of the parables, he begins with, or ends with, let him who has ears to hear, hear, or let him who has eyes to see, see. So what does he mean by that? I mean, nearly everybody has ears, and they hear with those ears. But what does he mean by hear, and what does he mean by see? What phrase do you use when somebody explains something to you that you understand? Oh, I see. Doesn't mean you see, it means you perceive. You understand what's being said there. So when Jesus often in his parables prefaces it or follows it with, let him who has ears to hear or him who has eyes to see, see, he means some of you aren't going to get this. You have to be in the proper state of mind. You have to be in the proper, to use a fancy phrase, interpretive community to understand it. Here's the real problem. Even his closest followers usually don't understand. And so he'll take them aside, or they'll take him aside, and they'll go, Jesus, what did it mean? Explain that parable. And to them he will say, to you it has been given to understand. Why? Because he's later going to send them out on their evangelistic, journeys and such. Okay? So a parable is only a story to make something clear to those who understand what the story is making clear. All right? This is a parable. How clear is it? You have to be in the right frame of mind to understand it. Okay? Is part of what Hawthorne is saying. Now, one other comment about that subtitle. Notice it has a little footnote. And the editor Michael Meyer, tells us this is Hawthorne's note. This isn't the editor saying this. Okay. And the note says, another clergyman in New England, Mr. Joseph Moody of York, Maine, who died about 80 years since, that is, in 1756, made himself remarkable by the same eccentricity that is here related of the Reverend Mr. Hooper. This guy, however, the symbol, the black veil, had a different import. It had a different meaning than what it means for Parson Hooper. This guy, we're told, this Mr. Moody, killed somebody accidentally when he was young. And ever since then, he covered his face. Okay, till the day he died. So why does he cover his face? Shame. Why do people, famous people, they get arrested and they immediately try to cover up because they don't want people taking their pictures and stuff. One thing to note about this footnote, it may not be true. See, Hawthorne uses this fiction where he creates notes. And in fact, in one of his most famous work, I'm pretty sure it's Scarlet Letter, it begins with a chapter that talks about how I found the material that is published here as the Scarlet Letter. I'm not the one who's writing this, I'm just telling you the story that I found. That's all a lie. He didn't find it. He creates it all. Okay? Why? It kind of adds this aura of believability to the story. I'm just merely reporting what I've heard. Okay? So, look at the story. Again, let's look at the parable. The sexton stood on the porch of Milford Meeting House, pulling lustily at the bell rope. What's the setting? Where's the setting? Some town called Milford. Do we know where that is? Is the state given? No. We're given a name of another city nearby, or another town or village nearby in a few moments. And you can look on maps of this time period. They're in Massachusetts. Okay? But we're given a couple of other indications of the time frame. All right? The guy's job title is sexton. Now that doesn't narrow it down very well. A sexton is someone whose responsibility is to take care of the church grounds, the church building, make sure there's oil in the lamps, that there are candles, that it's dusted, all that kind of stuff. All right? And he also pulls the bell, we're told. But the building is not called a church. It's called a meeting house. Okay? Why doesn't he call it a church? Well, I'm not saying that this is what this group of believers are called. But in the Quaker version of Christianity, the place that they meet is called the meeting house. It's not called a church. And they go in and they sit on these benches and they sit there, and there's not a set liturgy. That is, you don't begin with a hymn, you don't have songs, praise songs, etc. You don't have a sermon. You don't have a set, somebody stands up and prays. In a Quaker meeting, everybody sits silently until the Spirit moves someone. And then that person shares something, usually a prayer. And this will go on for a while, and then if there's a long period of silence, everybody knows the Spirit is left and it's time for us to get up and leave. Okay? But those places are called meeting houses. This is not, however, a Quaker meeting because of what we see happen in the church. Loud reading of the Psalms, sermon, etc. So he's standing on the porch, and we're told he's lustily pulling the bell. He's got that bell rope, and he's just going to town on it. This is loud, cacophonous, bing, 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 bing kind of a thing. Okay? And we're told the old people of the village came stooping along the street. Why are the old people stooping? Because they're old. They're not young. They don't have full control of their bodies. They're, shuffling along. Look at people, the older they get, the more they tend to do that. Children, meanwhile, so we get this juxtaposition of the old people nearing death and children full of life. They're tripping, skipping along, or mimicking the old people. Spruce bachelors, that is, young guys, decked out, look really nice. As they walk, they're checking out the women who are also dressed nicely. Okay? And we're told when the throng, the people, had mostly streamed onto the porch or into the porch, the sexton began to toll the bell. So when most of the people had gotten to the building, the sexton now starts tolling the bell. Well, what's the difference between ringing the bell or polling the bell and tolling? You go to a bank to get some money. What is the person called who gives you the money? A teller. Is that because they're telling you your money? No. Toll refer to counting. So at first, he's just ringing the bell wildly. Now, the bell has an ordered, slow, solemn, bong, bong. The first ringing of the bell indicates to the townspeople, it's time to come to church. They hear the ringing, and they start making their way from their homes to the church building. When most of them get to that porch, he has stopped the lustily pulling the bell, and now he starts this kind of slow, methodical bong, bong. In other words, we're getting closer. Church is about to begin. And while he's doing that, he keeps his eye on the door of the parsonage, which is real close to the church building. Once that door opens and Parson Hooper steps out, he stops ringing. Why? It's a sign to the people already on the porch and starting to go into the church building, take your seats. The parson's making his way. It's like if you go to a theater or you go to a concert, an indoor concert, what do they do to get people to take their seats? Flash the lights. Okay? If there's an intermission, during the intermission, people are milling around, getting drinks and stuff. They flash the lights. That tells you, usually, you've got like 10 minutes to take your seat. Okay? So, he stops ringing the bell, and he cries, we're told. But what has good Parson Hooper got upon his face? Notice, he doesn't just say, look at that. Parson Hooper's got some on his face. He cries. He yells this. What does that cause everybody to do? What if I suddenly said, look at that? Because I see something through that window you don't. Your eyes are there. Everybody turns their eyes upon him. That's when he comes in wearing the cloth. All within hearing immediately turned about, beheld the semblance of Mr. Hooper pacing slowly his meditative way towards the meeting house. With one accord, they start, that is, they kind of jump, expressing more wonder than if some strange minister were coming, etc. So how does Parson Hooper make his way to the church? Does he hear the bell, stop tolling, and realize, oh, shoot, I'm going to be late, and rush? No, he walks his slow, meditative way. We're told that he's melancholic, he's meditative, he's abstracted, abstract-minded, abstractly, whatever. His mind's elsewhere. He's thinking on things, okay? Goodman Gray, are you sure it's our patron? Excuse me, our parson? I'm certain it is. And the sexton explains how Parson Hooper wasn't supposed to be here, but plans changed yesterday. Okay? Then we get this long description. We hear that Mr. Hooper is a gentlemanly person of about 30. That is, he might be 29 or 30. Still a bachelor, dressed with due clerical neatness. That is, he's dressed appropriately for the day and job at hand. Okay? But one thing remarkable about him. He comes in wearing a piece of black cloth. And we're told that the black cloth covers his forehead to just under his nose. His mouth and chin can be seen. All right? But there's a problem with that description. Because we're going to be told that when he speaks, the breath coming out of his mouth moves the fabric. If it doesn't cover his mouth, the breath doesn't move the fabric. If it covers his mouth, then when he talks, it moves. It's just a little problem in the story. All right? And then on nearer view, that is, as he gets closer, people realize, actually, it looks like a piece of crepe, which is really thin fabric, folded together. Big deal. That little detail is unimportant. But it probably did not intercept his sight farther than to give a darkened aspect to all living and inanimate things. That is, everything. That is, just like I can hold this, and I can see bodies. I can see the windows, I can see the walls and stuff. I can't make out faces. Similarly, he could see bodies. He couldn't make out faces. But notice what we're told it does. It gives a darkened aspect to everything. Meaning, he doesn't see everything clearly. And with this gloomy shade before him, okay, because it's here, he makes his way. So the gloomy shade goes all the time with him. Now, what does the word gloomy mean? It means darkened. It means like in shadow. This shadow, because shade means it's shadow, going before him. So wherever he goes, he's kind of in this slight darkness, all right? Going before him, we're told he walks onward, slow, quiet pace, stooping somewhat and looking on the ground. Why is he stooping? He's not old. He's only 30. He shouldn't be stooping. So why does he? Can't see well? Is he, trying to pick out, make sure he doesn't step on any rocks? Possibly. We are told he's looking at the ground. Watch people sometime. If they're walking, head held up, shoulders back, this way, if they're walking with their head held up, looking ahead, their shoulders are going to be up. They're upright. If you notice someone who walks looking at the ground, what does the body tend to do? It follows the eyes. I've just inclined slightly, and my shoulders roll forward. Okay? I used to be a runner, I used to run marathons and stuff. You would see people. There's this woman who runs near where I live, and she runs, and she's all hunched over. Okay? If she would stand up, she'd give her lungs, room to breathe and all that kind of stuff. Okay? But as he walks, as he gets close to the meeting house, he sees people and he nods to them. Why? What does that nod mean? What does it mean if you nod to somebody? At the very least, what are you doing? Greeting, you're acknowledging them. You're saying, you exist. What do they not do in return? They don't nod. Why? Because he's scaring the hell out of them. They're like, what is this freak? I did tell this story to my other two classes where I'm doing this years ago. This is back in the 90s. I was coming back from KUC, checked my mail, because I didn't get it here for some reason. I was coming back from KUC, and it was in a break between classes. It was like lunchtime. And there's this, just this mass, this herd of students heading probably from, Mass Comm building to Peck along the big walkway. And here comes this guy, not making any kind of judgment or anything. Here comes this guy, blonde kid, 20, 21 years old maybe, all kinds of piercings, and eyebrows, cheek, and not piercing, but like paper clips, nose, eyebrows, etc. Coming down the middle of the walkway, just crossed over the road, wearing a white leotard and tutu, and he's skipping. And this mass of students going the opposite direction. I mean, it's like Moses standing there at the Red Sea. They just kind of go, and give this guy, I'm not kidding, like 5 feet on either side. Like whatever he had was contagious. Okay? He was totally oblivious. He's just marching along to the tune of his drum. But none of those other people kind of like, other than moving aside, because they didn't want to get it, Nobody said anything to him. This is before earbuds and, all that kind of stuff. Long time ago, okay? So wonder-struck were they that his greeting hardly met with return. They're just frozen. The sexton, I can't really feel as if good Mr. Hooper's face was behind that piece of crepe. What? What does that mean? Is his face really there? Or has it, disappeared? An old woman, I don't like it. He's changed himself into something awful, only by hiding his face. Has he? What does she mean by awful? Does she mean horrible? Which is how most people use the word awful today? That was an awful event? That was a horrible event? No. She means full of awe. Okay? And Goodman Gray kind of sums up both of those. Our person has gone mad. Have they said anything to him? Has he said anything to them? Nope. What are they doing? They're jumping to these conclusions simply upon the basis of appearance. What are we told? What were we told that the cloth did to his vision? He saw everything what? Darkened. Didn't mention this to my other classes. St. Paul, in one of his Corinthians letters, says, now we see through a glass darkly. And by glass, he means like these. In other words, we all see, everybody, what the point is, we see through darkened lenses. And if they're darkened, if they're dirty, somebody's come around and cleaned the windows and pick all. You used to look through this window and it'd be like someone threw a bucket of mud on it. I mean, it's just filthy. You could barely see through it. Okay? It was a great teaching opportunity or whatever. Who sees the worst here so far? Does he see worse than they do? What are they doing? Another term. Psychologists use the term projection. What does that mean? If so-and-so says something about somebody else, psychologists will sometimes say, what that person is doing is projecting. They're putting on somebody else what's inside. Okay? So, as he arrives to the porch, because people have seen him coming and they've been talking, what happens? Words go from the porch to inside the building. And everybody, as Parson Hooper gets to the doors of the meeting house, everybody inside is, and they're moving around, they're trying to get a look. There's all this noise and hubbub. All the congregation, we're told, is set astir. Okay? He keeps going through. He nods to people on either side. Again, acknowledging them. And then he gets to the oldest member of the parish, an old geezer. And he bows to this guy. Why? Because he's his elder. And you show respect to your elders during this time period. But the old guy kind of looks at him and doesn't see him clearly. He knows something's different, but isn't sure what. It's only when Parson Hooper gets up to the front of the church, he rises up the stairs onto the stage-like area, and gets in the pulpit and turns around and faces the congregation, we're told that the old man became conscious of something singular in the appearance of his pastor. He seemed not fully to partake of the prevailing wonder until he rises into the pulpit. Face to face with his congregation. Okay, face to face means what? It means like where we are right now. Oh, yeah, except for the black veil. So it's not really face to face, is it? It's face to veil. It's face to covering, face to something hidden. That mysterious emblem was never once withdrawn. Mysterious emblem. What's a mystery? Something unknown. Can you do scientific inquiry to find out what the something unknown for a mystery? Actually, you can't. A mystery is something that is unsolvable. A mystery is something completely, totally inexplicable. It's not something that can be solved by more scientific study. Okay? Cosmologists, people who study the universe, its age, all that kind of stuff. What are we told? How are we told the universe began? Big Bang. What question does the Big Bang raise? What went bang? Stop it. Getting all kinds of spam calls today. What was there before the Big Bang? Good scientists will say, we don't know. That's not a question that is answerable by science, because we are a product of that. We can't go back to find what was before that. There's no evidence of what was before that. Okay? Similar kind of thing. We're told by cosmologists, by scientists, on the basis of Edwin Hubble's constant, it's called the Hubble constant, the universe is expanding at a fairly set rate. The same expansion in all directions. So at one point there was a center, whatever it was, blew up, and everything's going outwards. Question, what's it going into? If it's expanding, what's outside it that it's moving into? Isn't that also part of the universe? In other words, what's outside the universe? That's unsolvable. Two more examples. Within the Christian tradition, the general Christian tradition, the idea of the Trinity, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. One God, three persons. Wrap your head around that one. Logically, you can't. It's an article of faith. Similarly, Christmas, the incarnation. The God that created everything, that is outside all time, that is outside all place, and yet everywhere present, becomes an 8-pound, 19-inch baby. There's not enough duct tape in the world to wrap your head around that and keep it intact. That's a mystery. It's unsolvable. It's an article of faith. So this emblem that he's wearing, we're told, is mysterious, but it's an emblem. What's an emblem? Don't see any around here. There might be one on the back of there. Several of you guys have emblems. Several of you have emblems on your clothing or on your shoes. Almost everybody in here has probably got an emblem of some kind on them. An emblem is an indicator of meaning. Okay? What's the Nike swoosh? It indicates Nike, right? What does Nike mean? Is Nike just a shoe and clothing company in Beaverton, Oregon? No. Nike goes back to the ancient Greek goddess. What was she the goddess of? Victory. Conquering. You wear that swoosh because, according to marketing experts, it will make you victorious. Okay? Or whatever the emblem is. An emblem is something that imports meaning, whatever that meaning is. Okay? So this is a mysterious emblem. But an emblem, again, has a meaning to it. You go into an Orthodox, like Greek, Russian Orthodox. You go to an Orthodox church, they're full of icons all over the building. Why? Because every one of those images pertains to a person and tells a story. The story, the person behind it, is the meaning of it. So emblems convey meaning. What's the problem here? Nobody knows what the meaning is. That's why it's a mystery. Okay? And we're told he never takes it back. He never pulls it up. It shook with his measured breath as he gave out the psalm. There's the problem. If it's not hanging over his mouth, it shouldn't move. If he's speaking, like if I were right now, had the veil over, and the veil only came down to here, that thing wouldn't move as I talk. It's only going to move as it feels the air flowing out of my mouth. It threw its obscurity between him and the holy page, the Bible, its obscurity, its darkened aspect. You want your preacher to not have the Bible obscured. Supposedly, the preacher is one who understands it better and such. Okay? And what else? When he prays, notice, he doesn't say, let's all bow our heads. He prays how? Eyes looking upward and hands probably like this, indicating openness. But his eyes are upward. His face is looking up to God. And that thing just lays flat across his face. The veil lay heavily on his uplifted countenance. Did he seek to hide it from the dread being whom he was addressing? Is he trying to hide himself from God? Okay? We're told, such was the effect, this great, that many women of light nerves, delicate nerves, had to leave. Like, oh, my heart. And they had to be led out. Perhaps the pale-faced congregation was almost as fearful a sight to the minister as his black veil to them. Okay? Notice what that implies. We're told that he is a fearful sight to them. Why? Because they can't see his face, right? They don't know if it's really him. And yet the narrator says, maybe they were as fearful a sight to him. Why? What does he see when he looks at them? What lies between his face and their faces? A black veil. He's wearing it, but it's also between them. So when he looks at them, what does he see? He sees a black veil on their faces. Ooh, kind of changes the dynamic a bit. So he gives a sermon, and we're told generally he's a good preacher. He doesn't win souls to heaven by fire and brimstone, by literally scaring the hell out of them. Okay? But we're told this sermon is unlike any other sermon he's ever delivered. There was something, a couple lines down in that longer paragraph, on 332, there was something either in the sentiment of the discourse itself or in the imagination of the auditors, which made it greatly the most powerful effort they had ever heard from his lips. Notice what Hawthorne, the author, puts in the mouth of the narrator there. There was something either in what he said or in their imaginations that made this thing the most powerful ever. What does a story, any story, or poem or film or song mean? Is the meaning solely in the words of that story, poem, song, film, etc.? No. It's partially where? Partially at least. It's in each one of us. How so?
We all perceive things differently based on our experiences.
Bingo. Because of our experiences. Because of how we were brought up, how we were raised. If you were raised in a strict religious family, let's say within the Christian tradition, a lot of the language used in here may not be very foreign. If you were raised in a completely secular home, a lot of this language is going to be really hard for you. I did a graduate seminar 20 years ago on 17th century English poet named John Donne. We're going to read a couple of his poems. Poet and preacher. One of my students was a graduate student from Saudi Arabia. She was Muslim. Her understanding of Christianity was next to nil. Okay? Most of the students in that class had at least a smattering. Some of them much more than others. I think one kid was a preacher's kid. That guy had a pretty good understanding. So, it was incumbent upon me to try to reach, levels of understanding from up here to down here. Okay? Why? Because their imaginations were very, very different. So what is being suggested here is some of it came from his words and his delivery, let's say, but some of it was also in their own hearts. We're not told what the topic is yet. It was tinged, rather more darkly than usual, with the gentle gloom of Mr. Hooper's temperament. Tinged gloom. Look throughout the short story of all the words that indicate something that obscures, something that hides, something that makes what is seen less clear. Gloom and gloomy both refer to something darkened. Shade, shadow, dark, darkly darkened, hide, hidden, obscure, obscurity, veil. All those imply keeping us from seeing clearly. Okay? I refer to this. Paul writes, now we see but through a glass darkly. But then, I think it's 1 Corinthians 15, he says, but then, meaning after death, after the resurrection, we shall see clearly. Anybody know what the next phrase is? Face to face. Our experience of God will be like this, with no veil. Okay? There is a veil. What's the veil now? It's a rhetorical question. Just think about it. What's the veil now between us? And, if you believe there's an afterlife and all that kind of stuff. And God, or whatever the source of supreme being is. Okay? So it was tinged with more than his general gloomy temperament. In other words, this guy is not, I did say it the other day, this guy is not a happy-go-lucky, look on the happy side of life, the glass is half full person. He's kind of a little bit more pessimistic. We're told the subject of his sermon had reference to secret sin. Secret sin. Not the kind you go blaring on TikTok and, etc. And those sad, here's that word again, mysteries, or mysterious, and those sad mysteries which we hide from our nearest and dearest, and would fain conceal from our own consciousness, feign, and would like to, or pretend to, hide from ourselves. Okay, sin is what? It's an action. It might be an action of the mind, lust, or an actual physical action, stealing or something like that. How can you hide something you do from yourself? Try to justify it? What else can you do?
Just not acknowledge it.
Not acknowledge it, repress it. What else can you do?
Lie to yourself.
You can lie to yourself. You can tell yourself over and over and over again, it's not a sin, it's not a sin, it's not a sin, it's not a sin, until you come to believe that. Okay? So, the things you would hide from your nearest and dearest, the things you try to hide from yourself, even forgetting that the omniscient can detect them. Omniscient, all knowing. Okay? A subtle power was breathed into his words. Each member of the congregation, from the most innocent girl to the guy of the most hardened heart, feels like the parson comes up behind him and goes, "Boo! I see you." There was a movie many years ago. I know what you did last summer. I know what you did. Or, I know what you do in the darkness. I know your secret. Had crept upon them behind his awful veil and discovered their hoarded iniquity of deed or thought. What's it mean to hoard something? To keep. The original meaning of that word hoard, that's your treasure chest. That's where you put what you really value. Okay? Now it kind of has gathered the meaning of it's a big conglomeration of stuff. You hear about old people dying, and somebody goes in their house and you find out, oh, they're a hoarder. You go in, stacks of newspapers and everything. They couldn't throw anything away, you know. Depression era children, where they're told you don't throw anything away, you just reuse it. My father was like this. Okay? But what is being hoarded? Iniquity of deed or thought. In other words, it's like, okay, God, I'll tell you about all these bad things I did, but this one over here I'm keeping secret. You can't have this one. You can't see this one. And God's going, dude, I see everything. What do you mean I can't? Okay? And everybody kind of wished that a wind would blow through and just lift the veil. Like, if we just lift the veil for a moment, we can see his face. What? All that pathos, all that feeling, all that guilt would suddenly blow away. If that's the case, then what has the veil kind of come to signify for them? It's just like God standing in the pulpit and going. So, the service ends. And we're told the people hurried out with indecorous confusion. Indecorous. It wasn't calm and orderly. It was, let me get out of here before the shooter comes to us. It's not, women and children first. It's biggest and strongest first. Everybody. And what do none of them do? The implication is that normally people stop and greet Parson Hooper. Now, nobody says anything to him. He comes out, notice, in the rear of the flock. Everybody else goes out first. He's the last one out. And we're told he turns his veiled face from one group to another. He pays due reverence to the hoary heads, that is, old people with white hair. He salutes the middle-aged with with kind dignity as their friend and spiritual guide. It doesn't mean salutes like that. He greets them. He greets the young with mingled authority and love, and he puts his hands on the little children's heads to bless them. That was always his custom. In other words, he acknowledges everybody. He says, how are you doing, good man? How are you doing, good woman? How are you doing, little Julie, etc.? Okay? And we're told, strange and bewildered looks repaid him for his courtesy. None aspired to the honor of walking by their pastor's side. Nobody wants to walk him to his door, which they usually do want to do. Why? like that guy in that tutu, he's too weird. He's too out of the ordinary. He's too different. Okay? He goes to his home, and just before he closes the door, he looks back on all the people, and everybody's staring at him. No one would say anything to him. No one would acknowledge him. But man, are they paying attention to him. A sad smile gleamed faintly from beneath the black veil. Why? Because it's not covering his mouth now. And flickered about his mouth. And a woman says, how strange that a simple black veil, such as any woman might wear on her bonnet, should become such a terrible thing on Mr. Hooper's face. Again, why is it terrible? Is it just the fact that it obscures his face? Something must be surely be amiss with Mr. Hooper's intellects, says her husband, who's a physician. A physician, you would think a physician would be calm, cool, rational, logical. And he says, strangest part, it even affects me. What does that tell us about his opinion of himself? Well, I'm not like you simple folk. I mean, I'm a physician. I'm the most upstanding person in the community. I've got the education. And it even affects me. He's a little full of himself. All right? And he says it makes him ghost-like. Ghost-like means what? Dead. Okay? And he says to his wife, do you not feel it? And she says, truly I do. I would not be alone with him for the world. I wonder if he is not afraid to be alone with himself. How can you be afraid to be alone with yourself? Ever heard of the phrase pity party? What's a pity party? Things aren't going so well, you're by yourself, you can't go do anything with friends, or you don't want to go do anything with friends. And what do? You just spiral down. That's what she's getting at. Okay? So, later on that day, the afternoon, there's an afternoon service. And the service ends with a funeral. And they're like, nah, he won't be wearing the veil. But some are thinking, veil would be appropriate. What do people often wear to funerals? Especially women. Veils. Okay? And he comes in, and he looks at his deceased parishioner. He takes a last farewell. Okay? This is an open casket. He's doing what's called the last kiss. Okay? And he leans over the casket so that the veil, which is normally like this, does this. So now he can see the dead person, and if she were alive, she could look up and see him. And we're told, middle of that paragraph on page 333 at the bottom, so that if her eyelids had not been closed forever, the dead maiden might see his face. Could Mr. Hooper be fearful of her glance? That he so hastily caught back the black veil? That is, as the veil does this, he hastily catches it back up. A person who watched the interview between the dead and the living scrupled not to affirm that, at the instant when the clergyman's features were disclosed, the corpse had slightly shuddered. When the veil fell open, the body went. Now we know dead bodies, within a few hours after death, do that. We're not told how long the body had been a body and not a person. Okay? An old woman, a superstitious old woman, saw this. Okay? So the pastor delivers the sermon, and he prays, we're told. His sermon prayer was so full of sorrow, so imbued with celestial hopes that she won't go on to the great beyond, live with God in heaven and such. that the music of a heavenly harp swept by the fingers of the dead seemed faintly to be heard among the saddest accents of the minister. Not literally. It's like as he's speaking, people almost, I can almost hear the angels coming to get her. The people trembled, though they but darkly understood him. In other words, what is between his words and their understanding? A veil. They but darkly understood him. They don't get what he's saying. When he prayed that they and himself and all the mortal race might be ready. This is what they don't understand clearly. Might be ready as he trusted this young maiden had been, for the dreadful hour that should snatch the veil from their faces. What veil? Notice, as he trusted the young maiden had been. He trusts had been ready for the veil to be snatched from her face. What's the veil? In that reference, life. It's the thing that separates life from death. Maybe the body. We don't know why she died. We're not told. But we're told that now, according to his words, her veil is lifted. She sees clearly now. She's dead. She doesn't see what clearly now? This. She sees what's beyond. And in one sense, because she sees or is beyond, she sees what? She sees everything clearly now, including how she was before the veil was lifted. Okay? Because what were we told earlier? During the sermon, people kind of wondered, or the narrator says, maybe he was indicating the desire to hide from our own conscience. In other words, that there's an inward veil that we try to keep up so that we don't have to do what? Look at ourselves clearly. Okay? So, they go forth later in the evening. As they make their way to the burial, one person says, I kind of felt like I saw the dead girl walking hand in hand with the minister. And someone else says, yeah, so did I. Later in the evening, there's a wedding. The most beautiful couple in town are getting married. Okay? And they're like, no, he won't wear the veil here. I mean, that'd put a jinx on the wedding. And he shows up wearing the veil. Okay? And we're told, middle of that long paragraph on 334, such was its immediate effect on the guests that a cloud seemed to have rolled duskily from beneath the black crape. A cloud rolls out from under the veil to do what? What do clouds do? Overcast. They do all of these things. They hide. What? What is on the other side of the cloud? And dimmed the light of the candles. See, that's a very specific phrase. Why? Because Hawthorne is playing on an old Christian tradition. An old English. I don't mean old English Anglo-Saxon. I just mean a traditional English custom. That when people are married, that when a couple is married, you've got candles in the church. Why? Because there's not gas lighting at this time. There's not electrical lighting and such. That when a couple is married, they're each given candles. And the candles indicate or symbolize their lives together, kind of a thing. It's an omen. If during the ceremony, one or both of the candles get blown out by a gust of wind, or something else. It's an omen because what that means is this will not be a good or long marriage. Okay? Similarly, Christian tradition. Somebody gets baptized. They were given a candle. The candle indicates the new birth, etc. If they've got that candle and they're standing there, whoosh, it blows out. That means they're going to die soon also. Okay? So the bridal pair come up. They stand before him, and the brides were told, cold fingers quivered in the tremulous hand of the bridegroom. So he's shaking, and what are we told about her fingers? They're cold. Take another person's hand in yours that's alive, and generally they're what? 90% of the time they're warm. If they're cold, that usually means one of two things. They just came in from the cold, or not living anymore. Touch a corpse that's been dead for more than a few minutes. In the Orthodox tradition, when you have a funeral, my mother-in-law died last May, when you have a funeral, you have the open casket and that thing, as I mentioned, called, the last kiss, where you say your final goodbye to that person on this side, so to speak. A lot of people don't like, you're not required to, it's only for those who want to, don't like going up and kissing the corpse. Why? It's cold, man. It's like this thing which is full of ice water, cold. It's not like 80 degrees. Even though it is 80, to our sensory perceptions, it feels like ice. Okay? So her hand, like ice, and his hand shaking. This is not a good, not going to be a long marriage. And we're told, in her death-like paleness, caused a whisper that the maiden who had been buried a few hours before was come from her grave to be married. So she's pale and she's cold. Looks like a corpse getting married. If ever another wedding were so dismal, it was that famous one where they tolled the wedding knell. That is where, I think the reference is, someone literally marries a corpse because they wanted to be married in life, but the person died just before the wedding, and they went ahead with it. Okay? Hooper raises a glass of wine to his lips. Why? Well, what do you do at weddings? You toast the happy couple. We notice, by the way, popular conception about Puritans is they're sour, they're dour, they're not any fun, they don't do anything that involves any fun, like drinking wine. He's getting ready to throw one back. In a strain of mild pleasantry that ought to have brightened the features of the guests. In other words, this should have told people, hey, it's okay, it's Mr. Hoop, he's fine. And what happens? At that instant, catching a glimpse of his figure in the looking glass that was the goblet. So it's not like he just pulls this up to his lips. He does what? He holds the goblet up for everyone to see. And probably, I'm not 100% positive, but I'm pretty sure, he's holding that goblet up for the couple to drink from that he will then drink from. He, because he's the presiding officer of the church, and because they are going to share this drink together, indicating their shared life from this moment on. So he holds it up, and what happens? He sees himself. Catching a glimpse of his figure in the looking glass, the black veil involved his own spirit in the horror with which it overwhelmed all others. What has he just experienced? You look like you want to say something. He sees himself the way others see him. Try that. He doesn't see himself the way, what? He wants to. What's the whole thing about trying to hide from our consciousness that secret sin? Because if we can do that, then we can do what? We can put on a face so that nobody else sees it. His frame shuddered. He's terrified by what he sees. His lips grow white. He spilt the untasted wine upon the carpet, and he rushes out. Where? Into the darkness, to be hidden. Why? For the earth too had on her black veil. It's dark. Next day, all anybody could talk about is crazy old Parson Hooper. Okay? So, at this point, we can skip a little bit. Someone says somebody needs to talk to him. They delegate his fiancée. Oh, we hadn't been told before that he was engaged. And so Elizabeth goes to speak with him. What happens as a result of this interview? What does she require of him? What does she ask of him? Just once. Just lift it up once. Doesn't have to be now. I mean, she wants it to be now. It could be on our wedding night, because hopefully they're going to lift up other things and take off other things. And what does he say? Never. I can't. And she says, middle of 335, there's nothing terrible in this piece of crepe. It's like she's looking at him and it's almost like she touches it and says, it's not like she touches it and feels sin, She says, except it hides a face that I'm always accustomed to look at. I like looking at your face. It's not like he's hideously ugly or deformed or something. She says, lay aside your veil, then tell me why you put it on. In other words, tell me what it means. Hooper, there is an hour to come when all of us shall cast aside our veils. Sounds kind of like the little prayer that he delivered at the funeral of the young maiden. She has cast aside her veil. Okay. Take it not amiss, beloved friend, if I wear this piece of crepe till then. Till when? Till I die. That's the hour. Your words are a mystery too. In other words, whoosh, right over my head, buddy. Come down a little. Take away the veil from them at least. Tell me what you mean. He says, I will, as far as my vow may suffer me. What vow? Are we ever told anywhere in the story what vow he has made to God? That he got down on his knees one night and said, oh, great and mighty God, I make this vow to you that I will never take off this black veil ever again. Nope. We're never told that. Okay? He says, know then that this veil is a type and a symbol. Type and symbol. Okay? Type refers to a means of understanding / interpreting the Bible. You have what is called typological interpretation. You have characters in the Old Testament who are a type. They point to a person in the New Testament. Okay? They are not that person. They point to him. Someone give me an example of somebody from the Old Testament who is a type who points to Jesus. Because that's what they are. They're types of Jesus. David, Moses, Samson, Melchizedek, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the other patriarchs, etc. They point to Jesus. Moses is what? The great deliverer. He delivered the Jews out of bondage in Egypt. He's a type of Jesus because what is Jesus? According to traditional Christian theology, he is a deliverer. Why? He delivers his followers from the bondage of sin. Samson delivered the Israelites from the power of the Philistines. Okay? David delivered them from the power of Goliath and the Philistines. Jesus delivers us from the power of sin, and all that kind of stuff, okay? They point to that. So he says this is a type. In other words, it's pointing to something else. It is not important in and of itself. What might be one of the things it's pointing to? We've already alluded to it twice now. Death. And the thing that separates, because death, is the thing that separates us from living here and living there. Okay? So he says it's a type and a symbol. The symbol is what? It's like a type. It also points to something else. But a symbol is two things. A symbol is intimately connected with the thing it represents. So talk about the veil for a moment. How is the veil a symbol? How is it both what it is, a veil, and a symbol? You remove the veil and what happens? Think of the dead girl. Then face to face with God. So what's the veil? God tells Moses, no living man can see my face and live. In other words, in this stuff, you can't see God. You can only see him on the other side. Okay? So, and I'm bound to wear it ever, both in light and dark, in solitude, before the gates of multitudes, as a stranger, so with familiar friends. No mortal eye will see it withdrawn. What does no mortal eye include? His own. He will never lift the veil and look in a mirror. When he looks in a mirror, the veil will always be there. This dismal shade, dismal means dark. It doesn't necessarily mean sad or horrid. This does what? It separates me from the world. Why? Because there is a veil that separates us from what? The real world. The world beyond. Okay? She says, what the hell is wrong with you? That's what grievous affliction hath befallen you means. That you should do this. So he says, okay, if it's a sign of mourning, of great sorrow, he says, I perhaps, like most other mortals, have sorrows dark enough to be typified by a black veil. I have things in my life, in my experience, that can be demonstrated by this. I bet if we were to go around the room, make a nice circle, do a kumbaya drum circle, we could all start to talk about crappy, shitty things that have happened in our lives. That's what he's talking about. And she says, but what if the world thinks that it's not some innocent sorrow? Not something that happened to you, but what? Something you've done. Not the car accident you were in, but the people you killed when you were driving drunk. Ooh, big difference, right? Beloved and respected as you are, there may be whispers. People might say, oh, that Parson Hooper, you know what I heard. And he says, she says, for the sake of that, for the sake of your holy office, that is your position as pastor, do away the scandal. Nip that in the bud right now. Don't let people think this about you. Okay? And he says, if I hide my sorrow, my face for sorrow, there is cause enough. And if I cover it for secret sin, what mortal might not do the same? Okay, Elizabeth, let's take your scenario. Let's say I do have a secret sin. Who doesn't? What did Jesus tell the men who were stoning the woman caught in adultery? Anybody know?
Whoever hasn't sinned can throw the first stone.
Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. These guys are sitting there with these big old rocks. You know what? When the Bible talks about stoning, it's not like little tiny rocks. We're talking about bricks. Okay? Let the first one of you throw the first stone. who has not sinned. And they're like, damn it, Rabbi. Because they have to drop it. Because they know in their heart of hearts, they've sinned too. Okay? And he resists all their entreaties, and we're told, top of the next page, though of a firmer character than his own, the tears rolled down her cheeks. In other words, we're told, this is a strong girl. She's got backbone. And in an instant, as it were, a new feeling took the place of sorrow. Her eyes were fixed insensibly. Insensibly means she's not intentionally focusing on the veil, but now she's drawn to it. And like a sudden twilight in the air, its terrors fell around her. What does that mean? It's like she suddenly has the veil on her. And she experiences what? Terror. She arose and stood trembling, and he says, I'm going to use a different phrase that he uses. Gotcha. You get it now, don't you, Elizabeth? You feel it, don't you? And all she does is cover her eyes with her hand and try to leave the room. He holds her back and says, stay with me. Do not desert me. Though this veil must be between us here on earth, be mine. And hereafter, meaning the hereafter, no darkness between our souls. Lift the veil once. Look me in the face. He says, never. She checks out. What's the terror she feels? What does he see when he looks in the veil? Himself? Is the veil really a mirror? I'm asking. I'm not saying. So when he opens his eyes in the morning, there's that damn mirror. Can't escape it. Okay? So, a little over 10 minutes to go. Time goes by. Long time goes by. He becomes an old and venerable pastor. He's still there. He's still preaching. And what happens? People come from far and wide just to listen to his sermons. What have we been told already about his sermons now? They convict people. It's like a bloody knife to the heart and just digging it open, getting at that wound. Because what do you have to do to wounds before they can heal? You got to clean them. You get a nasty cut, I mean a real nasty cut, or a nasty abrasion. Okay? You got to get all the crap out of it, because what happens if you don't? It'll start to heal and it'll fester and it'll rot. David famously in his Psalm 50 or 51, depending upon your version of the Bible, says to God, create in me a clean heart, O God. Why? Because the heart he has, it's foul. What did he do that prompted that psalm? Anybody know?
Basically murder.
He slept with Bathsheba, got her pregnant, and then sent her husband off to fight in the most horrific part of the war. Why? So he would die, so that he could marry her. She then delivers a dead child, and Nathan the prophet goes, I know what you did. And that's when David writes this beautiful psalm of contrition. All right? People come because they want to be convicted. He's on his deathbed, lying there. The minister of Westbury has come. There's other ministers and men there. Why? Again, I said, he is a venerated. Venerated doesn't mean worshipped. It means respected. Old preacher. Okay? He's lying there on his bed. Hands are like this. He's trembling and stuff. And the minister of Westbury says, Venerable, this page 338, Venerable Father Hooper, the moment of your release is at hand. Are you ready for the lifting of the veil that shuts in time from eternity? Now the veil is described differently. It's not the living from the dead or the dead from the living. It's that shuts in time here from eternity. Because what does the word eternity literally mean? Outside of time. See, eternal doesn't mean endlessness. It means outside of time. Immortal means living forever. Immortal doesn't mean being eternal. God's the only eternal being, so to speak. Okay? And Father Hooper says, he motions his head. And he says, Yea, my soul hath a patient weariness until that veil is lifted. Come get me now, Jesus. He's tired. And is it fitting, says Reverend Mr. Clark, that a man so given to prayer of such a blameless example, holy in deed and thought, so far as more blah, 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 should die with this stain upon his reputation? Is it fitting that someone as holy as you are should die not making known kind of like what the veil means? Okay? And Reverend Mr. Clark leans forward and starts to lift the veil. And Parson Hooper, with his dying strength, we're told, snatches both his hands from beneath the bedclothes and presses them strongly on the black veil and says, Never on earth, never. Look at the reply. Dark old man. What's meant by dark? It doesn't just mean he's got the veil on him. It means hidden, secretive, in one sense even evil. With what horrible crime upon your soul are you now passing to judgment? In other words, you're still trying to hide this thing from God. And Father Hooper, we're told, his breath heaved. He takes a big breath in because he's going to give it all. And it rattles in his throat. Why? What is that? That's the proverbial death rattle. My daughter's an ICU nurse. She worked with COVID patients. And she was like, there really is one. Just before people die, there's and then they die, And he says, Why do you tremble at me alone? He's looking around at the men. Tremble also at each other. Have men avoided me, and women shown no pity, and children screamed and fled only for my black veil? Is that why everyone's been hateful towards me? What but the mystery which it obscurely, all these words, hiddenly typifies, points to, has made this piece of crepe so awful? In other words, it's just a freaking piece of cloth, folks. What have they done with that piece of cloth? Oh, they put all kinds of meaning into it. When the friend shows his inmost heart to his friend, the lover to his best beloved, when man does not vainly shrink from the eye of his Creator, loathsomely treasuring up the secret of his sin, then, only when those things are done, then deem me a monster. Okay? When you, with your bestie, totally, completely reveal your innermost being to that person. When you, with your lover, wife, husband, whatever, fully reveal everything in your mind and heart. Don't do this, by the way. Great way to a relationship. When you don't try to hide something from God. When all those things are done, then you can call me a monster, he says. For the symbol beneath which I have lived and died, I look around me, and lo, on every visage a black veil. It's like he wakes up one morning and he's like, lesson today and for the rest of my life. What's the practical lesson? I've got to get it into people's heads what I see. What does he mean? I look around me and I see a black veil. Everyone is doing what? Hiding something. What other word could we use for black veil? Shroud. What else? That covers just the face.
A mask.
We all wear masks, folks. What mask am I wearing right now? Teacher mask. It's not the same mask I wear at home. Because one of the masks I wear at home, father mask, husband mask. With my siblings, brother mask. Colleague mask. They're all different masks. Football mask, basketball. They're all masks. What's the real me? He's saying, stop wearing masks. Be real to each other. Now, have I said what the veil actually is? Nope. The mask is what it's pointing to. It's not what it necessarily is. Okay, we'll stop there. Remember, for those who came in a few minutes late, if you haven't sent me that email by D2L, do it, because if I don't have a record of you being here, since I didn't take roll, I won't know that you were here. So you got to do that so that I can do the attendance reporting, because if I have to report that you're not attending, the financial aid gods are going to come down upon you, right? Quiz is open tonight, the extra credit quiz. It's open for like 4 days, I think it is, until Sunday night. Make sure you take it and get the possible extra quiz points.